continuing on, let's talk about the yields. Now we're going to go through and talk about how these yields work, right? Remember I gave you an example of this in the class, so let's make sure we understand this, okay? Because this could be one of the handful of math questions that we come up with on the test. So first off, what are the different types of yields? Well, first off, we have the nominal yield or the coupon yield. That is the stated yield that's on that bond. So if the bond says it's a 6% bond, that means it's going to pay out $60 every year until it matures. And it doesn't matter what happens in the marketplace, that dollar amount that it's going to pay out doesn't change. Then we have the current yield. Now, the current yield is based on what you actually paid, the purchase price of that bond. Or we could talk about the current yield, which is based on the current price of that bond in the marketplace. And that gives us what our current yield is, which essentially is saying, here's what the current interest rate is. Now, we also have to be aware of yield to maturity and yield to call. Remember, those mean that we have to keep in mind that the bond is going to mature at some point. So if you are, for example, with a 6% bond, 1 year away from that bond maturing, that means you're going to get what? $60 in interest and the bond is going to mature at $1,000. Then you wouldn't want to pay more than $1,060 for that bond no matter what was going on in the marketplace, because what? Then you would actually lose money, and we don't want to do that. So the yield to maturity and or the yield to call is going to use the fact that the bond is about to mature and it becomes sort of like a zero coupon in that we have to take into account what the bond is going to mature at when we look at the prices. Now, as I've said before, and we said this in the class, this is a diagram that you want to learn how to draw. Like we learned how to draw those boxes for the options, and that gave us the ability to answer those questions. We want to be able to draw this chart, and that will help us answer the questions involved with this. Now remember the basics of the chart. You got the big X, and remember that if interest rates go down, then what? Bond prices go up. If interest rates go up, then bond prices go down. But we use this the opposite way, because here we start on the left-hand side, and we say that what? If we bought the bond at a discount, then the what? The current yield is going to be lower than the yield to maturity or yield to call. If we bought the bond at a premium, then the current yield is going to be higher than the yield to maturity or the yield to call. So what you have to remember is the order of the lines. So when you draw this, remember that the current yield is the inside line, the yield to maturity is the middle line, and the yield to call is the outside line. So remember that when you draw this, and make sure you can draw it so that you can answer the question. It's probably only going to be one, maybe at a stretch two, but by drawing this, you know for sure you're going to get that question right. And let's go on to the test subject alert here. Now remember, I've got very few of these in the review, but remember this one is in here because very likely to get a question on this. Remember that you see a bond that's trading on the basis of, then they're talking about that yield to maturity. Yields are measured in basis points, and a basis point is 1/100th of a percentage point. So, for example, 0.01 is 1 basis point. A 1% change would be 100 basis points, and they could use that term basis points on the test. Now, another very important thing that we need to be able to do is to do this yield calculation. Remember, the yield calculation is pretty simple. It's the little number divided by the big number, but you have to remember to get everything in annual dollars. So remember that if it's a dividend, we've got to multiply that quarterly dividend by 4. You can absolutely bet that they're only going to give you the single quarterly dividend payment. So if the quarterly dividend payment is $25, we've got to what? Multiply times 4 and put $100 as the annual income. If we're talking about a bond, you've got to multiply the interest by 2 because they're going to give you the what? The dollar amount of the semi-annual interest payment. So once you have the dollar amount of the interest that is being paid, that goes on the top, and the current market price goes on the bottom, And as we went through and did the example in the class, that means that will give you your current yield. A very simple calculation, but one of the ones you're very likely to see on the test.